Hi everyone, I have a few stories I'd like to share with you. The first one is called Tom Thumb of the North, and this one is my interpretation of an old fairy tale done northern style. Once upon a time, I found a strange rock. It was almost the size of my father's fist. It whirled around and around in an ever-tightening spiral, and the gooey contents grasped its way around, creeping across the shoreline. I marveled at this strange creature, part rock and part goo, a tongue that expanded and contracted to drag itself around on the land or in the sea. It left a glistening trail behind it. I looked around at the shore, but I didn't see anything else like it. I knocked the strange thing over with a piece of driftwood and watched the soft part pull itself inside the rock and bar the entry with a tough, browny red membrane. I wondered what it must be like to live inside a rock. Not much room. I'd probably end up sitting on my own face. But I was determined to find out. The next time the creature ventured out of the stone, questing around with its eyes on stalks, I grabbed its body with one hand and the rock with another, and I pulled steadily. It was tricky work, but I'm used to working with slippery things, and after a while I slid the whole thing out. I looked at this naked little thing, and then I popped it into my mouth and swallowed it whole. I looked more closely at the opening of the rock, and I held it to my ear. I could hear the ocean in the distance. Strange that it sounded so far off when the sea was right there and not 10 strides away. I heard the faint sound of waves echoing within the rock, and I set it down, and I walked inside. The walls were smooth and wet, like melting icicles, and they shone like the aurora. I followed that curving tunnel. It kept getting smaller and smaller until I had to creep around on my belly. But up ahead, I could see a small light, a faint light. That's where I had to go. I squeezed my way through to the light and plop! This world was dark and juicy. I smelled fish, and when I tasted all the juices around me, I could taste fish too. I heard the waves, but I also heard groaning and bubbling and deep gurgling moans stuff. Like, where was I now? Hey, I called out. The fishy mess responded, Yes? Who are you? I'm the belly of the orca matriarch. Who are you? I'm Tom. A sudden slippery thud as a giant fish came rushing in and landed on my head. Ow! Sorry, Tom, a gal's gotta eat and you're in the way. How will I get out of here? Have you tried leaving the way you came in? I pondered this. How could I crawl back into that strange rock? I quested around the belly of the orca to find a surface similar to the curving tunnel of the rock, and finally I found it. So tiny, wedged up against the bones of a fish busily being digested. I pushed my fingers inside, opened it enough so I could slide my head on through, my shoulders inside, and then I was sliding down along the curve, picking up speed until the rock squeezed me right out. I shot out of the stone, reborn as a full-grown man. I coughed up the strange gooey creature I'd swallowed and gently poked it back into its home. It closed the door behind itself. I put the rock inside my pack, and I walked home. It took me only half the time because my legs were twice as long. When I got back to the skin tent, my father was just a tiny boy wearing his adult clothes. He stared at me with his little mouth opened wide in a circle and then averted his eyes because he realized he was staring and that was rude. "Father," I said. "Tom," said my little father, "why are you so small? Why are you so big and covered in fish?" I looked down at myself. My anorak was dripping with fish and my kamek was slimy with fish and my mittens were all covered with it too. "Look," said my father, pointing behind me. And I turned to see a parade of hungry animals, and they gobbled up all those little bits of fish that I left behind me in a glistening trail. Little father grabbed his bow, but he was no longer strong enough to draw it. So I took it from him in my big, strong hands, and I harvested wolves, foxes, weasels, gulls, and polar bears, too. We would not go hungry. The strange spiral stone was the answer for the times when hunting proved fruitless. Now, what was I to do about my little father? After we were done the skinning and the cutting, we had enough to feed and clothe everyone in the entire camp. And I pulled out the magic rock and I handed it to my father. "When we have run out of food, you must fill your mouth with melt water and go all the way inside this stone. Keep going until you see a faint light, and then you push through into the belly of the orca matron. When you arrive, let the sweet water spill from your mouth into the orca's belly. She will appreciate the gift, as fresh water is a precious treasure for someone who lives in the salt sea. And once you've given the gift, return the way you came and put the strange creature back inside its rock." For a time, we all ate well. Mother made new kamek from the polar bear skin and lots of new warm clothes for the cold times to come. But then the hungry times returned when the seals hid from us. The migrating caribou were nowhere to be found, and all we had left were a few scraps of fermented walrus and a few frozen fish. "It's time, Father," I said. And my tiny father swallowed the strange creature, filled his mouth with melted snow, and strode inside the rock. I walked the rock to a spot not too far from the camp, and I waited with the other brave ones for the return of my father. We waited and waited, and finally he came out. He was a big man again, and I was a little boy again. He raised a fishy mitt in greeting and walked back to our igloo, leaving a trail of fish across the snow. And before long, all the hungry animals were drawn to the feast, and this is how we never went hungry again. The next story is not necessarily so much for little children. This one is called Engakok. And an Engakok, that's the Inuktitut word for someone who is a shaman. It was only me and my granddaughter, the wind moaning around the curves of our igloo. We huddled within, two soft things around a kulik with not enough seal oil. She clutched her empty belly. Our light grew dark within the ice womb, and I became the brave one. I opened myself, and lice fled my softness, charging out of the igloo to lie on the ground in lines with tongues lolling, tails wagging, and the air split by whining and barking, squatting by the kulik with my back pressed against my granddaughter for support. I reached with both hands between tattooed thighs, grasped the entryway to my womb, and I strove, and I grunted until I'd pushed enough and pulled out of myself my sex in the form of a chamutik. We were no longer two soft things. I had become the hard thing to her soft thing, and I filled her belly with seal meat and with child. Exile. My first drop from my womb in a litter. I give birth alone, with no one but the wind and sister sun to keep us company. My husband swam off to visit my father to get food for me and these, our firstborn. And one at a time I whelp them, children harnessed to me by umbilical cords. I bite their traces with my teeth. And they tumble out of me, gather them to my teats, and I give suck to these brave little ones. Some babies look like me, with black hair on their heads. Tiny fingers clutching my fingers with ferocious strength. Some babies favor their father, furry all over with tails curling and pink tongues poking out of their mouths like a sea worm. Some of my babies look like the two of us combined into one, white-furred, but with long legs, long arms, long necks, and huge slashing claws. These ones I name Nanook. Where is my husband? I wash my babies with melt water. I dry them and eider down. I curl myself around them to keep them warm, and they wriggle, whine, and fight over my breasts. Oh, don't bite me, children, I sing. Soon we will have milk enough. Soon we'll have meat enough, and fat enough, and blood enough soon. But for now, we wait for a father they will never meet. This is the time, just before Spider-Woman meets Kivioch. My sod-roofed hut is sodden without and within. The roof is drenched with the mist which always shrouds this veil of scrubby trees and sphagnum, and on the inside, that is the moisture from my cooking pot. Men are stacked around me in neat piles, and today is the boiling day when marrow-bone femurs sip their flavors into richness. The meat isn't fatty enough, so I add seal oil until it swims across the surface. Round floating islands grab at one another in a large amber slick, then scatter like lemmings when I stir the pot and poke down any protruding bones. I sing to myself while I cook. My eyebrows hang down over my eyes, blinding me to all but my work, and off to my side I hear him moan. The men stacked like firewood are speaking to me. Push us into the cauldron, they say, but they shall have to wait their turns. Spiders creep like lichen across my arms. They are my children, and tonight we shall sup well. The roof is always making sounds. Bugs burrow in, making nests, making worms, until on the rainy days, water and maggots patter down onto the earthen floor. I scoop them up and eat them by the handful, or I feed them to my children. This is the best time to be alive. I have no use for the frozen time, so I die. We die. And when the rains come to melt away the snow and drench the bogs with water and larvae, I resurrect myself and weave an orb as a cradle for my youngest. The sounds of the creeping things bring me comfort. The sounds of the fire bring me joy. The sound I hear now brings me confusion. What is that great noise? I don't know it. It's not the sound of my stew, of my crackling embers, my shaking fire, my moaning stack of corpses. No, it is something new. I look up, but my eyebrows dangle in my way. No matter, I don't need them on my face anyway. So I slice them off with my ulu, and I pop them into my mouth, and I look up into the shocked face of a living man. Nagramick, thank you.